Hey there, Husker fans, on a snowy, icy Thursday morning. It's the Pick Six podcast. We have a single heavy hitter, Tom Shatel, this morning. One of our other heaviest of hitters, Sam McEwen, is on the road back from Chicago, where the Nebraska men's basketball team made it a short stay for themselves and for him. All kinds of fun going on. How are you today, Tom?
Good. Just hanging out,
Hanging out at home.
waiting for tonight's Creighton game. That's where I'm at now. So,
Yes, I mean, it's March. This is March. March
yep.
Madness is coming up. We're gonna touch on some football today. Matt Rhule winning the offseason, maybe a little bit of baseball at the end. But I mean, right off the top, man, it's possible that Nebraska is done with its season with men's basketball, coming off a 78-75 loss to 14th seeded Minnesota on Wednesday night. I mean, real basically, Tom, how is this group going to be remembered? Because we don't know if this is it. They may or may not have an NIT shot moving forward. How are you going to sort of judge this season and remember this group?
Well, last night was a bad ending. But it is hard to beat somebody three times. But it's hard harder when play defense in the first half. And that was just it's kind of sad night to see it all end like that, because it was such a joyful 2 or 3 weeks of just great energy, excitement. All those wins. The fans were really into this team. I felt like it was one of those teams that's going to be remembered because they were just so much fun to be around and so much fun to watch. But unfortunately last night they ended with a real clunker, and they didn't have any clunkers the last 3 weeks, but they picked a bad time to have one. So, we can break apart the game if you want, but I think they'll be remembered as changing the narrative. Now it's up to Fred to take it and advance it next year. But one thing that people talk about progress, you could scoff at this if you want. But I was thinking, what was different about this season was there was heartbreak, and first 3 years there was just nothing except frustration. When's it going to start? When is this going to happen? When is that going to happen? There was actual emotion. There was excitement this year. There was hope, and then there was heartbreak. So that's, I guess, in itself progress. Now next year that there has to be postseason. But I think it was it a good year? In some ways, yes. It wasn't good enough, but I think it left people wanting more, and that's not a bad way to end it.
Yeah, I mean, 16-16, it's like the ultimate glass half full, half empty. It's like whatever you want to see, you can see. If you want to see that they beat Creighton in Omaha, you can see that. If you want to see that they beat Wisconsin and swept Iowa, like those are all really energizing things that you can build on. They overcame 2 injuries that looked like they were going to sink them. So like there were positives, but man, doesn't it feel very just Nebraska ball-y too? I mean, you have the losing streak early, you get the hope late, you get into the postseason, you lay the egg right away, like they always do in the Big Ten tournament. Like, I mean, I agree. Like 16-16 this year was enough. Next year, I don't know that it's enough.
Now, I do think they've hit on something with how they played this year. I think that going forward, that's how this program needs to play in the Big Ten. I mean, you can have your high flying offensive circuses and up tempo and shooting threes is great, but you got to be able to grind. You got to be able to rebound and definitely definitely play defense. And they did all that this year, and then now they have to do that going forward. With two or three of their top leaders. Hopefully, Tominaga. I didn't. I heard this on the broadcast last night that maybe the NIL rules for the foreign athletes might be might be loosened up a little bit just so he could get more money. That would be a big help. I don't obviously know him and don't know his family or anything about what he wants to do. But I know he loves playing to the crowd. He loves having fun, and he did that here. So I wouldn't rule it out that he would come back, but I guess we'll see how much he loves money.
Right. Well, I mean, it was such an interesting group because those injuries that that occurred mid-season sort of created this perfect storm where Tominaga played more and Derek Walker came out more offensively with the season that he had. Yeah. I just wonder, it was fun. It was like as we talked about before, these were guys who wanted to be here. They didn't have an eye on the NBA. They weren't looking ahead to the next thing. Like, it meant a lot, clearly, for all of these players to be here and play to the fans and all that. I just, I wonder how sustainable it can be, because you lose Derek Walker and you don't really have that next post guy in the wings at this point. You'll have to probably go to the portal to find somebody. Sam Griesel's done. I mean, it was a great year for him. I thought that was an example of what the transfer portal should be. Like you mentioned with Casey, who knows what his next step is? He's extremely popular back home. And so you could see how he could maybe decide to turn pro and do something else. But you just look at, assume that he goes. What are your building blocks for next year? Jamarcus Lawrence looked really good at times, but it's going to be another offseason where you're going to have to hit the portal hard and find some players. And it's just, I wonder if they can capture lightning in a bottle, kind of the way that they did down the stretch. I don't know.
He's going to have to, because he put himself in this position because the first 3 years, they went one way, and then now they're coming back the other way, and then they're trying to play catch up. A year ago we didn't know anything about Sam Griesel coming or Gary or Emmanuel Bandon, but we didn't know anything about those guys. So there may be more guys like that out there. In fact, they're Hoiberg told me that he's already gotten calls from inquiries from other players who want to come. So there will be options, but you have to get the right ones. You have to get the right fit. You have to build a team around the guys coming back. I really loved Marcus Lawrence. I wish he would have gotten the ball more last night. He came out hot, and all of a sudden he wasn't part of the offense again. So he really came on late. I think there's a lot to look forward to, but the way they finished almost masked the fact that there's a lot of low standards at work here. People were happy with the way this went, and this is not what anybody wants Nebraska basketball to be. So we're going into year 5. It has not been any postseason. So, they kind of have to get on the stick, and they've got to get something done next year. But the way they won those, they beat, Maryland, Rutgers, Wisconsin, Iowa twice. This is a program, a system that can win in the Big Ten. So you get the right players. And certainly Juwan Gary is a guy who's going to be able to guard anybody. I think you can make a move, but certainly it would be a lot easier if you had Tominaga. And what I can't think of a more popular Nebraska athlete if he came back than him. I mean, almost more than any football player right now. I mean, he would just own the place. So he can make a lot of NIL money. He really could.
That's right.
So we'll see.
I think, if you want to talk like optimistically where things could go moving forward, I think you touched on it, Tom, where it's like, even though the personnel is going to shift, like the mindset change that Fred made to make this more of a defensive first squad this year, I think was the most interesting part of the season, from a big picture standpoint, because we've seen the whole, rain in threes and sort of the style that he used at Iowa State. And it just, it obviously didn't translate to the Big Ten. And so when he went all in on a defensive approach, and got the players to buy in, like it sort of reminded me a little bit of Doc Sadler's early teams back in the day, where like that was their identity, and you kind of figured it out offensively. This year you had a guy like Casey to bail you out with some big games when he's shooting hot from deep, and Derek Walker, as a 25-year-old out there providing baskets. But like, I think that's the most interesting part. And there's so many football parallels too, where we talk about how do you adjust to the Big Ten and the style of play and winning. It felt like Hoiberg did that just in time. And now, to me, that's what I'm most curious about with giving him another year for, is how does that look with another set of players when you're trying to maybe play ugly basketball, and be happy with maybe winning a 65-60 game as opposed to trying to get into the 80s or something.
Yeah, well, you could do it. Everybody does it. The programs that win have this is how we play, and we go recruit players and they fit into our system. The problem is he didn't do this from year one. I mean, you got to know what you're getting yourself into, and it was almost like Frost. Well, this is what I do, and it's going to work because I say it will. No, Big Ten. The Big Ten laughs at your system. They don't care how much scheme you have. You got to be fundamentally sound and play defense and rebound. And it's and Fred knew that. He's been around the Big Ten. He was in Chicago in the NBA and Minnesota. He's been around. He's scouted Big Ten teams, and so it's a little. I don't know. I think if they get to the NIT next year, they'll buy him another year, probably. But they gotta find the right guys. But they can find the right guy. They've what they have coming back is a good solid base. They've got to go find a few playmakers, more length. A couple more rebounders, a big guy if they can. I don't know, but the big guy they have coming up, just how good he's going to be. So, I think it's doable. It's frustrating to, here we're going. You hope by year 5 everything will be in place, just like Frost. By year 4 or 5, he's going to have it going. And then in year 5 he got fired. So because he didn't, he never adjusted. So or he adjusted too late. So hopefully Fred will not suffer the same fate. So but absolutely year 5 will be big.
Year 1 for Matt Rhule, I mean, he's barely been Nebraska's head football coach for 100 days. I think a little bit more than that at this point. I wanted to ask you, Tom, a little bit about the column that you wrote recently about Matt Rhule winning the offseason. And this is not new, right? Nebraska football always wins the offseason with recruiting, with cool social media videos, preseason predictions, all this stuff. What to you has been different this time that feels, and maybe it doesn't, but what do you think might be different in terms of what Rhule's doing is different from sort of the standard Kool-Aid that people have been drinking over the years?
The fact that he's actually done it, that to me, that's the difference. Scott and to an extent, Bo Pelini came in here. Here's what we're going to do, and I'm confident we're going to be able to do it. But they never been a head coach before at this level, and so he has. And yeah, all of the press conferences and all the quotes are great. And I just kind of get giddy thinking about some of the stuff he says and how fans are reacting and just boy, this guy's all in. And I mean he acts more like a Nebraska coach than anybody they've had since Solich. I mean, in terms of caring about Nebraska traditions, going out to see the people, doing things that are Nebraska like, and it's I just marvel at that. My quote is, I just hope he can coach, because if he can coach, then they really hit on something, because he's doing everything else right. And but every time we hear like an assistant coach come in, or we hear the other staff guys, everybody kind of says the same things. They have this allegiance to Rhule. They believe in what he believes in. They all believe in this together, and that can be a powerful thing. But I just feel like every time we've heard from the coaches, they have a system. Here's how we're doing it. We have a plan, and to me, that's different. That there's a plan that works. It will work in the Big Ten. If they're going to get physical, it will. if they're going to be attention to detail, which, boy, I tell you what, they have been so far in the offseason. That's a good sign for what might happen on the field. But yeah, the videos of the players playing the games and the camaraderie and carrying each other around, all that's great. It doesn't mean anything until you get on the field. But I just like the fact that there's he's got a philosophy. It's worked in the past, and everybody buys into it. That's a great place to start. So, and I think he'll have a better roster. I mean, he's got a better roster than he ever had at Baylor the first year. I mean,
no doubt.
There's no question. So, I mean, if you look at it and you go, I mean, he's going to have players. So, depending on how fast they can do this stuff in the spring and August, they may this may not be a starter project, when they go to Minnesota. So, certainly some things will be, but I'm really curious to see how spring ball is going to go. Obviously, I get, as an offensive line fan, I get excited about the fact that they're just going to hit each other up for all 15 practices. And even though he says, well, this won't be a bloodbath and we're going to be smart about it, I don't buy it. I think they're going to go after it, and they are going to find out who wants to be there. They are over scholarship. They wouldn't mind if some guys who are just on scholarship and not really going to do anything if they took off. So they can't say that, but that's how they feel. So yeah, I mean, I really there's a lot to like, but as always, it's off season. Let's see how it goes. But I like the fact that he went back and watched all the games. He watched all the practices. He knew about the Iowa fourth quarter, how the defense played. I mean, that tells you that, here's a guy that is gonna. I'm not just gonna dismiss what happened, and he may want to build on that fourth quarter at Iowa. Depending on what the guys he has on defense who are going to play, what they can do. That to me is sort of the next question: is will he force his system down everybody's throat, or will he play to what his players can do? I think it'll be the latter.
Well, yeah, I mean, he's spoken to that. I mean, just to the level of having his coordinators give them their 11 rank, their 11 best playmakers on that side of the ball, and then say, hey, find a scheme to get those guys onto the field. I think the point that you make about attention to detail is compelling because like you said, we chatted with Rhule in his office last month, and he talks about how he watched not only every practice during the season, not every game, but every off-season workout, everything that was recorded, which is quite a bit at Nebraska, to get a sense of things. And we in the media even get just a little bit of a taste of kind of how much he wants to look at details, even from the little stuff at press conferences, from when we had seats on kind of flanking either side of the podium, and now they're across the middle. I mean, that was Matt Rhule wanting to have a better presentation, looking at looking at cameras. Or I even think about the availability that they had last week. First of all, college football programs, major college ones, don't tend to have availability wrapping up winter conditioning. Maybe they will to the start of spring practice, but not wrapping this thing up. So he wants to keep sort of front of mind. And I think the guys that we heard from, I mean, think about Thomas Fedoni coming up and talking in front of the media. How many previous coaches, Tom, do you suppose would have not been okay with a guy who hasn't played a down of football?
Absolutely.
I mean, at Nebraska, coming out and talking. And why I think they did that, beyond the fact that his team just won, part of their commitment week stuff was, and Fedoni mentioned it in his press conference, like he loved his old position coach, Sean Beckton. And he said, yeah, everybody, when there's a coaching change, you sort of look around. I think that's a shrewd move, even by Rhule, to say, hey, let's have this guy talk in front of the media. Maybe he can start thinking through and processing his own commitment to this program, and that can help the team long term. So, I think there's so much thought put into everything that they do, and it's you don't always notice it, but I think it's really interesting. And like you said, how that sort of shows up when the games start happening will be really fascinating.
Yeah, no, the other coaches would not have brought him up there. They would not have wanted him anywhere near it until he played, or they would not have even thought about that. To what you said, I think they're also trying to get him involved. Okay, you're going to do a press conference because you're going to be part of the team this year. You're going to play. You're going to be one of our big. We're going to rely on you. We're going to go to you. And so, get used to doing press conferences, get used to talking, and you're part of the deal now. I think that's really smart. It gets him involved. Like you said, it gets him thinking like maybe a starter, or like somebody who's going to play and is going to be part of the whole season. So. I did like that. I liked everything he's done so far in that vein. I also think he likes to, and maybe this is where the NFL helped, but the NFL, those guys talk all the time, and they do a lot of press stuff, and it's required. And so he's used to, giving updates. He's used to telling the public, here's what we're doing. Here's, they won't tell us everything. Obviously, he's a football coach, but I think he'll be very accessible to the Nebraska fans, and they're going to love that.
Yeah, I mean, we went months at a time in previous off seasons without hearing from former head coaches, and it's just a lot different. There's no doubt. So, all right, one more thing on spring, then, Tom. A couple weeks away, they have spring break here coming up first. Give me something that you're interested to follow this spring. Something, I mean, you mentioned the contact in practice. Is there something on, whether it's a player, position battle, side of the ball, that you're interested to track here this spring?
Well, gosh, I mean, the answer is everything. Everybody's going to look at the quarterbacks, but you really can't, because Casey's not in there. You won't know what he's going to be doing until August. I guess, to me, I always go back to offensive line, and the fact that they've got the veteran center out of Arizona State, who's an older guy. That is a potentially huge. I mean, the center is the most important position on the offensive line. He makes the calls. To have an older guy who's done it before, who can walk into the locker room and walk into the offensive line, which is going to be a bunch of new guys who have not necessarily played together a lot. And then you've got Teddy trying to come back. I'm anxious to see how they play, because they're going to be very important. And of course, our Coach Raiello probably won't tell us much. That's okay. He didn't have to. He doesn't have to be a big quote machine. But I think I think he's going to become. I think that they're going to put the assistant coaches out there a lot. I think he'll be more comfortable talking to us, and I think he'll answer questions about personnel and players, and then that's all we need to know. He didn't have to tell us any jokes. Mel Tenneper didn't want to do a lot of press conferences either. So, but yeah, that's my. I just want to see the offensive line. I want to see the physical play. But along with that, I would probably see running back. I think the running back, we focus so much on quarterbacks because Frost was a quarterback guy. Mike Riley was. The Bo Pelini offensive coordinators were these, spread gurus. Everybody, Bill County, quarterback. I want to get back to the running back being the star of the team. And so I think that, and that's a Big Ten thing. The old Nebraska teams with the I-back and the offensive line, that was a Big Ten team in a lot of ways when they dominated the Big Eight. And I think, the Big Ten is not a great quarterback league. It's a great offensive line league. But a lot of the teams that have really good running backs, not just 2,000-yard guys or 80-yard touchdown run guys, but guys who know how to get first downs. Amir Abdullah was a great Big Ten back. He knew how to get the first down. He would go inside and get the tough yards, but he could go outside too. I'm curious about running backs. I think that's a big piece of the puzzle. Not just this year, but I think going forward.
Well, and the thing about running backs that you mentioned, Tom, it reminds me of the fact that, and the coaches have said this, like, of all the portal ads that they had in the offseason, like, they didn't add anybody really out of the portal at the running back spot because they liked what they had, whether that's Anthony Grant or Emmett Johnson, Ramir Johnson moving back there. What does that look like? AJ Allen is healthy. So it's an interesting position, and it ties to the offensive line and other things, but they do feel like there's some depth. So yeah, that should be a really interesting position group. I'll kind of say, from our talk with Rhule last month, I'm really fascinated to see how they maybe experiment with guys in different spots. Matt Rhule coming from Penn State, where Joe Paterno would move guys to different sides of the ball on a whim. I'm really fascinated to see how he and his staff evaluate the talent that they have. He told us they already had moved Tommy Hill, who was the starting corner early last season, and then moved to receiver. Now he's back at defensive back. They'll have to make some decisions on some different linemen. Are they on the offensive side? Are they on the defensive side? But I thought something that he said about how some of his best teams always involved guys sliding down a little bit. So maybe a safety becomes a linebacker, or a linebacker becomes an edge, or an edge becomes a D lineman because they get bigger and they find out, that they're maybe just different kind of players than they were originally projected to be. I think that's really interesting. And then kind of like we were talking about earlier, if the task from the coordinators is to take your 11 best playmakers on your side of the ball and then finding a way to scheme that up, I think that's really interesting too.
Yeah, I think what you talked about is already, I think, in their minds. I think that going into spring, they have an idea who can do what because they've done the research. Now they're going to throw them out there in practice and see what they can do. And my guess is by the end of spring ball, there will be people who started at one position and ended somewhere else. I think by the end of the spring, I think that process will be done, and then they can go into the off season and August, ready to go. But yeah, I didn't say defense. But I'm not. I don't care about the scheme. And people are trying to trying to figure out how that's going to work and how you're going to stop the run with three down. I think that's just a formation. But by the way, it is used in the Big Ten by other teams. So it's nothing that new in college football. But to me, I don't care about scheme. Nebraska, ever since Bill Callahan started, we've been obsessed with scheme. Give me the players, give me the playmakers, give me the blocks and the tackles and the execution. Give me 11 nasty dudes on defense who are going to knock somebody's head off, and don't worry about where they line up. Just know that they're going to make a tackle and they're going to make a play and get a fumble or an interception, and they're going to make a stop. I mean, that's what the defense is supposed to be. So I don't care about the scheme. I'll make fun of it all I want, and everybody can make fun of me because they love scheme, and that's fine. But give me 11 nasty dudes, and that's the only scheme I want to see.
We're going to complete this breezy podcast real quick on baseball. And I know,
yeah,
I know it's people don't remember that it actually is in season until after the NCAA basketball tournament. That's cool. That's totally cool. I want to get your early impressions on one thing, Tom, and that's so Nebraska. They're 7-4-1. They pounded Northern Colorado in 2 games, as they should. Northern Colorado is not a good team. Mm-hmm. Illinois State up next. But one thing that stands out, and I'm curious to get your take on this. Nebraska has 24 home runs through 12 games. Do you know how many games it took them to get to 24 home runs last year? It's 35, almost 3 times as many games as it took. And what's kind of your impression from just on what this team can be, a month into the season?
Well, it's impressive what they've done. Number one, bouncing back from the early losses in San Diego, but also getting the bats going so early. This is a winner. This is college baseball in Nebraska. This is, you haven't been out doing that much. The bats are already red hot. To me, the thing and you know this, more than I do, but I just remember last year, LOB, left on base. It just seemed like Nebraska was LOB every game. And you're just frustrating. Boy, you could have won that game if you got that one hit. Or, always depending on the one hit. And if they get rid of the LOB this year, I think they're going to be fine. Because they're going to pitch well enough, probably. They're not going to be great on the mound necessarily. But they're going to hit. And I love the Vanderbilt win. I just love. It's one thing to play the good schedule, but to make the NCAA tournament, you have to win the games too. And it's not as good enough to play Vanderbilt. You got to beat them. That's going to hold up really well. And I noticed that I'm thinking, well, that'd be the best win in the Big Ten. Then I just saw Iowa beat LSU. So, right. And I was ranked, I think, right? So. Mm-hmm. But I really think Nebraska will, there's only so many quality wins in the Big Ten, not a lot. It's better than it was. They seem to get more teams in the tournament, but you need that the Vanderbilt chip is going to go a long way, I think, because certainly they're going to be there in the end. Vandy is, and anytime you can, show that on selection day. But I'm excited. I hope that there's good weather for this weekend. I don't know if there
Yeah.
will be, but
Eh,
keep them going.
yeah. The only thing I wanted to say about the offense, and it was interesting because they hit 5 home runs against some bad Northern Colorado pitching, and they're on pace for one of their better power seasons ever. But really, I look back to last year and power was way up across college baseball. And Nebraska, it really wasn't. And that was a big reason. Like they were left behind as most of the sport, moved on and hit the long ball at a greater frequency. Well, this year they're actually doing that. And for what it's worth, home runs are way up again. So I'm going to write about this at some point. But this explosion is not necessarily unique to Nebraska, and it's not necessarily unique to this season. This is something, whether with the construction of the ball or technology or older players, has been a trend in the sport. So I look at this and I don't see, wow, this is the best power hitting Nebraska team ever. I see this as them sort of keeping pace and maybe catching up where they lost some gains last year.
Yeah.
And if the pitching and the defense holds, then this can be a competitive team. I just, there were moments yesterday where guys like Gabe Swanson and Cole Evans, who are younger players who don't have a lot of history with hitting the long ball, are blasting off at Haymarket Park, like in ways that you didn't see a lot of players do in the course of the last 15 years. And so that to me is sort of how I'm trying to look at this. Is not like this is a huge power hitting team, but this is sort of what college baseball is. And I think it's encouraging that Nebraska's at least caught up. I'm not going to call them the 27 Yankees or anything, but I do think it's key that they've caught up in this way where a lot of the sport's already done so.
Now tighten up the defense a little bit. That they had some issues with that last year too, didn't they?
Yeah.
But if that's the trend in college baseball and has been, it's gonna help Charles Schwab Field. The reputation that took so many hits early, the ballpark's too big and it's boring. And I think college baseball, you just needed to catch up with it a little bit. So there've been plenty of home runs in the World Series. So, but that's my goal. We got to get them to the road to Omaha in May, not necessarily June. June's great, but we got to get Nebraska to Omaha in May.
Right. Well, we'll wrap it up with that. It is March. There's still football practice coming. Basketball season's wrapping up. Baseball season's going on. Plenty to read about. Omaha World-Herald, omaha.com. For Tom, I'm Evan. Thanks for listening. We'll talk to you guys later.